This is Talking Sense with Dollar Bill. I'm David, Common Sense. Complicated issues like business operations and taxes require complex explanations. Talking Sense with Dollar Bill will explain these issues in plain language and have fun doing it. We must disclose that all opinions expressed on the show are of the hosts, and we advise that you consult a tax professional or attorney regarding any financial or business decisions. We always encourage your questions. Email them to us at info@talkingsensewithdollarbill.com. That's sense with a C. And now, without any further ado, I give you your host, Dollar Bill.
And welcome to the program today. We're looking forward to an exciting program.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to another exciting episode of Talking Sense with Dollar Bill. I'm Dave, Common Sense, your co-host, alongside my very good friend, Dollar Bill. How are you today, Dollar Bill?
Very good.
And we're here to guide you through the intriguing world of small businesses with today's focus on quiet quitting. That's our topic for today. Our discussion is based on Neil Hare's article in Forbes entitled, "What is Quiet Quitting and How Should Leaders Respond?" This concept is not just a buzzword, but a reflection of real shifts in workplace dynamics and employee attitudes. So let's unpack what this means for employers and how it ties into the broader economic landscape. Just a brief word about Neil Hare. He's an attorney, and he's our author, of course, for the article. And he's the president of GVC Strategies, where he specializes in small business policy, advocacy, and communications campaigns. So you can find him on Twitter, and you can see more of Neil's articles and his full bio on allbusiness.com. So just wanted to give him a quick little plug there, considering he's written this really excellent article that we're going to explore today. So quiet quitting, Dollar Bill. We've got some quotes, but before we dive into them, any initial thoughts that come to mind when you think of the concept of quiet quitting?
Well, the challenge is the fact that the person doesn't really leave the premises. They just stop doing half of the work that they were supposed to be doing. So the quiet quitting is actually a lost leader that you really don't want to have to absorb.
Yeah, one of the things that Mr. Hare explores in the article is that one of the real downsides to quiet quitting is that it could really affect the morale of your team.
Well, not just the morale, it's your bottom line also, because your productivity is part of running a business any way you cut it. And you don't want that productivity to get eroded.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when you think about it, you want everybody on the team to be pulling in the same direction.
And actually, you hear, I gave 110%. Well, maybe sometimes I'd like at least 90.
Yeah. Well, good. We're gonna have some fun with this article. I think it's really well written and well thought out. So we'll dive into that in just a moment. But before we do, we've got some quotes. Our first quote comes from Doug Conant, who is the former CEO of the Campbell Soup Company. And he said, quote, "To win in the marketplace, you must first win in the workplace."
Meaning that your employees and the processes that you implement are executed in a manner that is very efficient and effective in making sure that the production is at the right level.
Yeah, so if you want things to translate into your stores and to your customers, you've got to really start with the basics for your team, right?
Yeah, you want the team to work together and get all of the product to flow out in a fashion that is effective and great for the implementation and the use of the product.
Yeah, really great quote. I like this quote. I've got another for you. It's from Stephen Covey, who we quote quite a bit. And he's, of course, the author of the highly acclaimed The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of my personal favorites and a really popular work. And he said, quote, "Always treat your employees exactly as you want them to treat your best customers."
Well, that's an interesting suggestion. Certainly the motivation or the issues are a little bit different in that one you're encouraging to acquire the product, the other you're encouraging to create the product.
Yeah, that's true. So the expectations from each is definitely different, but I think he's talking about how you actually interact with them in terms of courtesy and sort of laying out the plan or laying out what your expectations
Well,
are?
I believe that in our society, you have an obligation to treat each person with respect and understanding and empathy and sympathy in the circumstances. So it doesn't matter whether it's an individual who's an employee or a customer. What we're really talking about is being polite and courteous and presenting to any individual, whether he's a worker or a customer, the respect that he deserves.
100%. Well said, Bill. Well said. I totally agree. And it's treat everybody with that respect, right?
Yes, and,
Yeah.
and you know, I mean, but when you're looking for someone who is, this is a framework or a highlight that is being exposed or generated in a specific manner in order to express the manner in which the persons or people want to present the information. I mean, that's just elaborating in a different way.
Yeah. Maybe what he's talking a little bit about is that certainly some employers may have a tendency to, dare I say, mistreat their employees. in a
Well,
way.
not truly respect the nature of what it is they're doing. And I'll tell you right now, when push comes to shove, the most important capital that anybody has when you invest in a business are the people that you work with.
Absolutely. So Richard Branson, the founder of the Virgin Group, said, quote, "Train people well enough so they can leave. Treat them well enough so they don't want to."
Excellent suggestion. Excellent suggestion. I'm all in on that one. Because let's face it, if you, in fact, are satisfied with the work, and that it's almost like when you raise your children, you don't raise them so they stay home for the next 80 years. You want them to get out and become proficient and accomplished in their own right.
Right. So training them and treating them a certain way. And I think that really is sort of an evolution of the Stephen Covey quote.
Right.
Yeah. So two more quotes. We've got a lot of quotes today. Two more quotes. One from Henry David Thoreau, which he said in the work called Walden. And he said, quote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation."
Especially when you're in the woods.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And I chose this quote today because we're talking about quiet quitting and, trying to think of it, not just from the company's perspective or the employer's perspective, but from the perspective of the employee, and what might be some of the motivations for quiet quitting or where that person might be at, so to speak,
The challenge of relating it to quiet quitting is the fact that if you're giving respect to your employees and your customers, you're going to leave some opportunity for some of that enjoyment process in saying, I'm going to meditate for a minute or two. You have a blend of opportunities in this process, and you don't want to say, well, I'm going to go ahead and take the next hour and a half to meditate, and really you should be accomplishing the mission that you were set out to do.
Right. There are objective standards, hopefully, that you're set out to meet, and you've got to focus on those.
And at the same time, you don't want that objective to be above the level at which they can be accomplished.
So winnable goals.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to, or I should say a terrible way to motivate someone is to give them an unwinnable goal, something that just can't be accomplished.
Yeah. Many, many years ago, like when I was 19,
Yeah.
I was a time study clerk in a foundry, and as I approached the individual that was doing piecework, they would automatically reduce the amount of effort that they were using so that the amount of time that it was taking to accomplish the mission would be extended simply because they were trying to demonstrate that they can't do it any faster, and you would get a better piecework rate if you got above the actual rate that was assigned at the time that you do the evaluation. So a time study clerk, and at 19, I really didn't know what the heck I was doing, but and I always wondered why they didn't like me that much.
There's a term for that. I think there's a term for that goes something like this: milking it.
Well, the individuals, of course, are trying to say, I don't want to be forced to go to a higher speed and lose some of the money I've already been able to establish.
Gotcha.
And so maybe piecework isn't exactly the right spot to go when it comes to some of the events. And today, what happens is the piecework is performed by robots.
Yeah. Now there's not even a person earning from that.
No. But only maybe the electrician or the manufacturer of the robot.
Yeah, or the programmer. Yeah, yeah, sure. One last quote for us today, a fun one from Groucho Marx, and it goes like this, quote, "No man goes before his time unless the boss leaves early."
Well, everybody should have an opportunity to occasionally have a minute or two for themselves. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Our system, fair labor standards, laws, and other things are almost too much to bear because you still have to get the work done.
It's true. It's true. There's got to be a happy balance. So let's do it, Dollar Bill. Let's talk about this article. The article opens up by saying, and I quote, "The latest buzz phrase coming out of social media is the concept of quiet quitting, whereby burned out or unsatisfied employees put forth the least amount of effort possible to keep their paychecks. The rationale for this workplace approach is that work is not the most important thing in people's lives. They shouldn't put in any extra time without compensation, and they should have freedom to pursue other endeavors outside of their employment."
The main problem with the suggestion that people do that, they may wind up without a job. And let's see how quiet that makes them.
Yeah, sort of. I've heard the expression, don't kill the goose that laid the golden egg. So you want to make sure that everybody in the team is pulling in the same direction, like we were talking about before, so that the company is profitable, so everybody can survive.
And those who attempt to be in this situation or want to do things in this fashion are creating a morale problem for everybody else who's working diligently to accomplish the mission in the most efficient manner.
Yeah. Mr. Hare talks about how this concept jumped out at him for a few reasons, and one of them was because it wasn't really a new concept to him. And he talked a little bit about some phrases that I think we've all maybe heard, one being phoning it in. The 80-20 rule, where 20% of employees are doing 80% of the work. And he pointed to a really fun episode of Seinfeld where George Costanza, one of the characters in Seinfeld, would be at work, and when someone would pass by his office in the hallway and poke their head in to ask him to do something, he would pretend to be really annoyed, which he equated to being very busy. And so the person would think he was really, really busy and couldn't be bothered, to do whatever other task they were going to ask him to do, and they were almost apologetic, and they would apologize to him and say, "Oh, so sorry to bother you, so sorry to bother you."
For interrupting
him, yeah. And then he would go back to reading his newspaper or whatever it was that he was doing.
Wasting the time.
Yeah.
That is a challenge. How do we define wasting time?
So Mr. Hare says the question is whether the 2022 version of this concept, and the article, full disclosure, this article was written September 1st, 2022. So he, obviously he's saying that the question is whether the current version of this concept is somehow different, and whether managers and business owners need to take a likewise different approach than they used to, especially in the wake of, and I quote, "the great resignation and with the growth of the gig economy."
Well, the gig economy and the fact that things are getting automated and the processes are becoming more and more effective, people are afraid they're going to lose their jobs, so they tend to try to expand the functions in an expectation that's going to preserve their job, which in fact it might destroy the job. And you want to be in a circumstance where you learn how to move up and you tell the robots what to do.
Yeah, we've talked about side hustles and the gig economy,
right,
and ways to enhance the revenue that is coming into your household, and things. And this, we've talked about the real benefits to this, the real plus side of the gig economy. And then, of course, there's this added pressure or this added nuance that he's talking about that has affected the way we can view the workplace situation, somebody in the workplace. He talks about how workplace happiness is a new concept for us, though. And
I'm not sure that workplace happiness, conceptually in my career, whatever I've done, it's happiness because I made it that way, not because somebody else made it that way. You have to have a positive attitude, and I believe that no matter how challenging the circumstances might be, if you take the initiative to make the job enjoyable and to enjoy the relationship that you have with your associates and coworkers, that's all going to have an impact on how well the operation is going to be conducted.
I couldn't agree more. So I think we both divert a little bit away from this idea that workplace happiness is a new concept. But what he talks about is, and I'm going to quote from the article, he says, about 30 years ago, the concept of workplace happiness was non-existent. Employers expected you to be grateful for an opportunity, and you were expected to go the extra mile to get ahead. This meant coming in early and staying late to show your commitment. Workers would compete to be the last person to leave the office in the evening, and of course, there was no expectation of receiving overtime for these extra hours.
There's an evolution that has taken place, and I don't disagree with him in the perception that in my era, in the early days, and our parents, they were committed to a single employer for the rest of their life in an understanding that this company or this operation was going to take care of them for the rest of their life. And that just isn't what happened. You have to have, that gets back to loyalty, and it gets back to expectations. And it also ultimately comes down to how much you rely on yourself to create the processes that you can develop because of your endurance and your attempts to make things work out for yourself.
Yeah, he talks about how management styles in the past are in many ways different from management styles today. And
absolutely.
Yeah, he says here, and I quote, "There were also many management styles that would not be acceptable in today's work environment. For example, managers were often encouraged to fire people when taking on a new position to show the team who was boss, even if it wasn't warranted. It was also acceptable in many companies to yell and berate employees for poor work, both privately and in front of peers. This type of tough love made the concept of quiet quitting much less appealing."
Well, I don't know about the appeal of quiet quitting, because quiet quitting can be an appealing process if the individuals who are above you are not treating you appropriately. So I could be in defense of some of those circumstances in the issue where the individual who's being the leader is not giving the right direction, and maybe you need to assess where you might want to move to.
Yeah. And, if a management style is to berate an employee or something along those lines, I can understand how, it creates sort of a culture of fear even in the environment, and make quiet quitting something that you don't want to get caught doing.
Well, I don't know if I should go here, but
oh boy,
in certain types of operations, you get something done more quickly than the others do it, in the hopes that you have more time to enjoy the process. Some of the individuals might say, "Look, you're not going to be rewarded for that. You shouldn't do that because you're making us look bad."
Yeah, I think that's what you were kind of talking a little bit about before. In terms of meeting out your time and
that's a different team, and it's a different entity, and it's a circumstance where the resources or the funds that are provided to the organization aren't necessarily generated from the customer himself, but from the system that creates that environment.
Yeah, but to your earlier point, if that's the case, then the company's not going to be competitive.
It may not have to be competitive because it's sort of a monopoly in terms of our system or our circumstances in today's world.
Oh, kind of like the too big to fail kind of idea. Yeah, sure.
There's lots of other issues that get involved there in different styles of business where they are mandated and you have to pay a fee to get it accomplished, whether you like it or not. That tends to enhance those kinds of environments.
You know, Neil Hare has some tips here for managing quiet quitting that I want to get into in just a little bit, but I can't resist diving into another explanation of his about management. Quote, another management ploy was to pit workers against each other to compete for one promotion. Hopefully you were smart enough to recognize the competition and who you were up against, and you had to battle accordingly. And ultimately, if you didn't get the promotion over your peer, you were often a dead man walking.
Well, that comes back to knowing when to hold them, when to fold them, and just change jobs, because certainly you're not in a position where you're going to accomplish or be a benefit to the organization as a whole.
Yeah, well, one of the things we like to do is encourage people to start their own small business.
And the challenges there are extreme enough, and the ability to put the right team together to get the ball rolling in the right direction so that you generate the resources, the money, the talent. I just had a conversation less than 2 hours ago talking to someone who is in the process of seeking an assistant. And I said, one of the main things you need to do is ensure that the competency of the individual you select is appropriate for the direction you're trying to provide for them.
Yeah, make sure that the level of skill is there to actually perform the task.
And when we say make sure, that means you've got to have the resources to assess in an effective way whether that individual truly has the competencies that they claim to have.
Yeah. So, Mr. Hare describes how the rise in mobile adds to workplace unhappiness, meaning today. And he says, and I quote, in the early 2000s, I started my own consulting business about the time mobile communications really got going. So while I was able to create my own workplace culture, clients started expecting companies to be available 24/7, 365, since they knew that you had a mobile device on you at all times. What about that, Dollar Bill? How does that add to somebody's...
It certainly adds to anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does.
The ability to be contacted 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is a valuable opportunity if the individuals who are attempting to take advantage of it understand that your response time, that real-time result, is not going to be accomplished because you've set certain rules where you may contact me and I might get back to you right away, but there's a very good chance if you contacted me at 6 o'clock on Friday evening, you can count on it not being responded till Monday afternoon or Tuesday if I feel like it.
Yeah, and this is what our author is talking about, having led to, or what he calls a perfect storm for quiet quitting. And he says, and I quote, the employee could began to say things like, hey, if you can ping me anytime, in other words, reach me anytime, I can quiet quit.
Yeah, and that, when you're trying to insert your operation into a 24-hour day, I don't believe that's appropriate, and none of us, except when you are the owner of the business, because it's your responsibility to ensure everything is running tip-top, and if you have an emergency, you want to be informed of it immediately. So
Absolutely.
There are circumstances where you're going to be at risk, okay, in needing to deal with things. I know I have dealt with individuals who, when they're on vacation in a foreign country, still manage to have their input into a particular circumstance because they can be reached. It is something that might be essential in a particular case. The challenge is just how essential is it?
Yeah, and he talks a little bit about this in his recommendations for what to do in the face of some quiet quitting at your company. But to your point, we really have to be able to assess what is urgent and what is to be involved in the normal process of things.
And how did you get into this urgent circumstance? Was it your procrastination that you deem has caused me to have this emergency? 100%. It's not my emergency.
100%. There's a great quote in the movie Hoffa where he was managing a strike situation, if I remember correctly. and the president of the International Union was calling him and couldn't reach him. And they kept getting his second in command, and his second in command went to him and said, "I've got the president of the union trying to reach you." He said something to the effect of, "Just because it's his emergency doesn't mean it's my emergency." So, well, our author here talks about how these differences between past management and past workplace situations and the situations of today that have led to quiet quitting in sort of a different way are real. They should be respected, and he says, and handled appropriately.
And to me, the appropriate way to handle it is to confront it. And to go to the individual and say, I've noticed that you're not quite as quick as you used to be. Or I really would appreciate it if you might pick up the speed a little bit, or take responsibility for adding this event or this circumstance to your agenda, so that I can see whether or not you're doing things within the time frame that I had expected you to be able to accomplish it.
Yeah, I mean, true to form, Dollar Bill, talking about setting expectations and then communicating clearly what those expectations are and how to reach them.
There you are.
So let's just get really quickly, let's get into some of these top 10 tips for managing quiet quitting, according to Neil Hare in the article, What is Quiet Quitting and How Should Leaders Respond? And his first suggestion, his first tip is no Sunday emails. He says, we all get them and probably have sent them. You're trying to get ahead on your week, so you fire off emails on Sunday to your team. That only elicits anxiety, stress, and resentment. It better be a firestorm or just wait until Monday.
It's an appropriate thing to outline some moments or some time where you take the initiative, and I certainly am one of the worst offenders of this. I'll do it on Tuesday. I'll do it on Monday night. And my associate, the two of us are sort of like each other. We're going to communicate with each other no matter what. 2 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock at night, doesn't make any difference. But if you're the owner and you know that, then you're just choosing to operate in that fashion or be aware of what might be coming. At the same time, if you were clever enough to say, we have meetings at 9 a.m. on Monday morning from 9 to 10 to assess what we're going to do for the rest of the week, you have a planning structure and you have a discipline that's going to bring you into the right area, and only discuss it in those particular time frames.
Absolutely. A perfectly reasonable and I think effective way to go about things. So he talks about number 2, he says no weekend work. And I'm just going to run through a few of these briefly while we've got a couple of minutes left to the show. Number 3, cut down on the number of meetings and their length. And then he says number 4, do you really need Slack or other collaboration tools? And he's referring to, of course, Slack, the computer program where you can collaborate with different employees. I like number 5. Let's talk about this for a sec. Limit workplace, quote, fun activities. He says, sure, the yoga class and happy hour seem like a good idea, but many workers want to do yoga and have happy hour on their own time and with their own friends. Maybe just give them back an hour of their time.
That's an excellent suggestion. I mean, you're looking at the productivity for the company itself is what you should be focusing on, not necessarily the group's social activities.
Dollar Bill, I think that what you just said really hits the nail right on the head, that it's about objective standards, talking about what is expected of somebody, and if they get those things done, does it really matter if they have time to themselves? Actually, it matters, but in a good way.
Right.
Yeah.
They deserve it if, in fact, they've generated it because they've gotten things accomplished more quickly than one would have expected.
Absolutely. He says, number 6, set goals based on achieving milestones and quality of work. Number 7, no team building exercise. Then he says, no explanation needed. Number 8, give praise. It's free. Number 9, pay more money. It's not free, but worth it. And then he says, number 10, fire quiet quitters. He says, at some point, if an employee is unhappy or not doing adequate work, it may be time to part ways, especially with those who spread negativity and disharmony throughout the team.
In order to protect the morale.
Yeah. For the good of the company,
Absolutely.
To move everybody forward. Well, that's a wrap on today's insightful discussion about quiet quitting. We've explored some strategic approaches and thoughtful measures that employers can adopt to boost workplace morale and productivity. And we want to give a huge shout out to Neil Hare for this really great and insightful article on what is a significant issue in the workplace. So now I turn it over to you, Dollar Bill, for any final thoughts or Your legendary sign off?
Well, in terms of the legendary sign-off, I say thank you for listening, and may your common sense turn into dollar bills.